Okay, Tony's right. The video started itself over. So essentially, I was going to talk about my short novel class and the books that we've read and kind of my thoughts on them. So, uh, yeah, let's see. Let me go to my Canvas. My school uses Canvas. A lot of universities use Canvas these days. I don't know what the system was before then. I forget. Like, I remember being a part of another system, and then Canvas was the one that like took over, I guess. So there's that. Oh, okay. It just okay. I like once again didn't provide feedback for these classes. So let's see. For modules, blah 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 blah. Journals, this syllabus and schedule. All right, let me like. I'm not gonna go in order of what we did. I'm just gonna like talk about the books a little bit or like give you my thoughts. Shit like that. Okay. Anyway, so we have like 14 books that we had to. Is it 14? Wait, 4, 8, 12. There's 13 books that we had to read. Essentially one per week, and then we had like a break 1 week and blah blah blah. Anyway, so we started off. I remember roughly the order, but we did start the um semester off with The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I know they won the Nobel Peace Prize, I believe. For did they win it for The Vegetarian? So it won. Okay, she won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and then she won the. Okay, so I'm trying to see. Yeah, so she won it in 2024. And then yeah, cool. What was it for? Like, was it for The Vegetarian or no? Oh my god! Like, anyway, she won it. She won it for literature anyway. So The Vegetarian is essentially about a woman who, at the beginning of the novel or short story, is married but decides to become a vegetarian, or really, really kind of like almost like vegan. Um, and she, through this choice, kind of disrupts the whole fabric of her entire family. Essentially, the story is told in 3 parts, and it's not really told from her perspective in any of the parts. Like the last part is kind of like she talks the most, but the first is her like husband's, the second is her brother-in-law, and then the third is her sister's, and like she interacts with all of them and she speaks in all of them, but the perspectives are from those people really and not from her. But you do get kind of like her gradual decline, essentially, when it comes to like that decision to not eat meat. And essentially it spirals into her refusing to eat at all. And we'll leave it at that. And so it's each section is kind of like it is like through her actions, the people in the story that are kind of telling their story, they get this reflection back at them of how they're supposed to deal with stuff and things they should kind of work on. Although the first person, the husband, does not work on anything. Um, the next story that we read, this is not in any particular order outside of The Vegetarian, and the last story also that night. It's like I'm just going through the list. So we read Desperate Characters by Paula Fox. So this is about a couple that lives in New York, and they're pretty affluent, pretty clueless as a couple. They're very like boxed into their world or whatever. But there's like a series of events that happen, particularly with the wife. She ends up getting bit by a cat, like a stray cat, because her dumbass decided she wanted to feed it, and then it like bit her ass. And she was like, oh my God. And then basically, like, after that, it kicks off a whole bunch of like, a series of like issues that the couple has. And it just kind of follows their issues, essentially. I like the prose in this. I like the characterization a lot. The plot, kind of like whatever. But it's supposed to be one of those plots that gets like macro and starts talking about society and privilege. And when you are very like in your own world and things are changing and you can't recognize or deal with the fact that things are changing, and it's like this couple is dealing with those issues within their marriage and outside of it, and it's just like, it's one of those kind of stories. So then we have We the Animals by Justin Torres. This is kind of like a memoir-ish type book, and so it follows him and his like two brothers and then his parents as they like, as he gets older, you read about like their misadventures and mishaps and stuff like that, and like issues and parental issues, and just like the dynamics of family. And then Justin Torres is gay, and so there's like a part in there where like several parts in there where he kind of reflects on that and the aftermath of like coming out to his parents and psychiatric like breakdowns and stuff like that. So it's very interesting. I really enjoyed the beginning of this story. I didn't really enjoy the end. I think it's because he had to write not the way that a child would write, but there was like a bounciness to the writing that I enjoyed because they were kids, I guess, and innocent yet kind of aware of a lot of stuff and kind of like in situations where they shouldn't be. It's kind of like weird. Yeah, anyway, I enjoyed the story overall. It was just, I prefer the writing in the first third to everything that came after that. The next one is Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls. We had to do writing journals, which I don't take notes when I'm writing. So like that part was like very hard for me because like I can talk about it and sometimes I can read. So yeah. But like I talk about it and but I just didn't like the reading part and taking notes after it or during it because that's not how I read. I kind of feel like I don't take notes like that. So yeah, but Mrs. Caliban was a good enough book for me. There is a radio that transmits like these lines in there, not like boo boo, kind of, alien speak, but it's just like, I wrote my response in my journal. I was like, the radio was such a waste of, the radio was a waste because it was like, I felt like we could have used the radio as a device to kind of subvert like what was going on or kind of like play into the hallucinations. Because one of the questions that ended up coming up was like, was any of this real in the story? And like, if you read it, you'll kind of come to that conclusion of questioning whether or not this is real. But yeah, like it was an interesting concept. I didn't like that device was used. It was plopped in there and it just wasn't used to the fullest capacity. And I just said that in my story. I was like, in my notes, I was like, it kind of pissed me off. Next we have Assembly by Natasha Brown. So this is about a woman who is in the UK, and after she gets like some news, she kind of just unravels and and willingly makes the choice to do so. And it follows her perspective as she navigates like the decisions that she is going to make and how everything in society has kind of pushed her to do all of these things, and in the end she was not happy, and in the end she just chooses an exit strategy, an exit plan, and you can read what that is. I like the story. I like the language. And another thing we had to do was presentations and listening to the people who like wrote the book, like listening to their perspectives on why they were writing it and what they were achieving and stuff was like interesting and cool, and gave you a little bit more perspective about craft. One of the things that Natasha Brown said, because this was my presentation, I had to do a presentation on this. One of my things was she was questioning whether or not language could be neutral, and so we talked about that in class. As far as the book goes, I just couldn't. I understood the craft and the technical and like what she was doing with it, but what I didn't really enjoy was that this idea, and it's the idea of capitalism that like is such an overbearing system that no one does anything, that people freeze or fawn and they don't act. And I feel like it was written from this perspective of freeze, and I just didn't jive with that, because I just feel like in everyday interactions people live their lives however perversely or however subversely under systems, and I was like, the writing doesn't capture that, and the writing makes this character whose perspective it's from, it makes it kind of like unrealistic to me. It didn't feel realistic to me anyway. Like that. So Long, See You Tomorrow. I definitely did not write this. I did not read this one. It's by William Maxwell, if you want to know. Yeah, like I did not. I did not read this one. It is, let me just Wikipedia it and I'll read it to you. So it's set in the hometown of Lincoln, which is the author's hometown. It talks about a murder. The narrator recounts things that led to the murder, and there's that. So if you're interested in murder, then cool. I didn't get to that one. I think this was one of the weeks I was probably struggling with my internet, and it was just a lot to like try and find internet and get online, and I had rented books and they were coming in late. It was just a lot going on like this semester. So I didn't get to that one. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. Again, I didn't get to this one either. But it's by Claire Keegan. Let's kind of look into this. So it looks like it takes place in Ireland. The main character's name is Bill Furlong. And I guess it's following his life and his interactions with the world around him. It's a film also. Cillian Murphy is in it. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Cillian Murphy is in it. I don't know. So yeah. And then Snow Hunters by Paul Yoon. Also didn't read. I think these were all in the same span. Like I did not read. Snow Hunters by Paul Yoon is kind of based on Yoon's grandfather's like experience being a North Korean refugee. So yeah, it's kind of based on his experience, but not. It's like a fictionalized kind of telling. So yeah, it's like a story of a character that leaves like Korea, and resettles and has a new life in Brazil, because there are quite a few people who left like Asia, particularly East Asia, and settled in Latin America in places like Brazil. There's a really high population of Japanese people. Places like on the western portion, there's like a lot of Koreans and stuff like that that have left their homelands and gone to like South America essentially. So it talks about that experience, and it zooms into one guy's experience, having left his homeland and going there. So there's that. Didn't really, I read through it, but it was like whatever. These weren't really my faves. Like I'm coming up to my fave. Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is about a woman who takes a job at a convenience store and works there for like a really long time, and kind of the people that she meets and the experiences that she has, and the main character is low key the writer. So it works. Yeah, it kind of is like working through, like she's like working through her issues, because she was a convenience store worker for years, like the actual writer, the actual author of the story. And so I feel like there's like a lot going into that, but it's like a character who she kind of develops an identity of a worker who lives there, essentially, almost like as dedicated as they are to the store and stuff like that. So it's like that kind of story, which is like, okay, cool, kind of interesting. It was fine, didn't bother me. Characterization, the main character essentially lives an ambitionless life, and it's a very day-to-day story. Yeah. There's that. Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. This is about a man who was responsible. It's like a fictionalized, like, memoir-ish. It travels through time, but it's about a guy who was involved in the expansion of the West in the late 19th century, like just the expansion of that, and what he's seen and heard and experienced contrasted with, I guess, the stories and histories that we tell. He's part of that class of people who, like, ordinary people wouldn't think to ask about their experiences, but he played a role in something that would be considered monumental, the expansion of the United States of America, right, westward, right, because the last states that we acquired were like in the 20th century. So yeah. States and territories. There we go. Date of ratification or admission, the last being Hawaii and Alaska. And then Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona kind of ratified, stuff like that. Anyway, that's, so he would have been a part of the expansion of the West, and it talks about his life, and it just goes back and forth, his marriage and his daughter and the experiences that he's having, and like there's something that happens and he unravels, and at the end he dies, and there's that. Anyway, I didn't like this story personally. I felt like if you're going to have a story, you need to make me care, and I felt like the way he was introduced, I did not care about that way. I didn't care for the introduction, the way that he was introduced, because it was just haphazardly, and it was just like, it was like a larger scene happening, and then we kind of like zoom in on him and what he's doing, and then once that scene is over, we just follow him, and it's like it could have been anybody in the scene, that the initial scene that we were like reading about, and we just focused on this dude, and I was like, he's not interesting enough to me for me to care. And that's how I was like kind of playing it, and that's what I said in my notes. He wasn't interesting enough for me to like care, and it really kind of pissed me off that he wasn't that interesting to me. I was like, really like F off. Okay, so My favorite story of the bunch was Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. So she's an Argentinian writer. And a lot of these people were from outside the US, which was kind of cool. So, what else? So, this story is about essentially an environmental activist kind of book in a way, but it's not overt and not like save the trees. Like, it's not that. It's like the story of this person, and they're talking to someone else, and through this story you get that they're kind of dying, and whoever's talking to them, it's a child technically, he's trying to get her to figure out what went wrong so they can, like, it's almost like, because it's very confusing, because people in the class, we did not know what the fuck was going on. Essentially, though, the story is following someone who's talking to this child or whatever, and they're trying to, like, they're doing this dialogue, and they're trying to, like, figure it out. It's almost like if you're talking to a therapist, and trying to figure shit out with your life. That's how it's going. It's like psychoanalysis in nature, and how the dialogue is being written about, and it's interesting because the author, like, the presentation that we have to do, I didn't have to do this one, but the presentation that someone in the class had to do about it was that Argentina has, like, a very large population of people, or psychoanalysis is something that's been really employed in the country given its history with violence and civil unrest and things like that. And there's, like, a whole history of, like, traumatic experiences, and this book reads kind of like that when you're trying to uncover something traumatic, like someone talking you through that so you can have this, like, realization and release. And essentially the story is kind of a realization and release of an environmental poisoning that has happened at the hands of a company, or at the hands of a larger corporation, that has infected, toxified, poisoned the, like, water sources, and therefore, like, a large portion of the surrounding areas that these characters live in. So it's environmental in that way. It's not like a save the trees, but it's, like, kind of interesting because there's some other things that happen where, like, a child gets sick, and it's the child that's actually talking to the person who is sick themselves. And how I interpreted it in my last final paper, I said that the person was actually the child that's talking to the character is a psychopomp. And because in the story, he's like, we need to get to the point where you realize where this happened. We need to get to this point. And she's like, the entire story is like, it doesn't matter. Like, he's like, no, it doesn't, but you need to understand what happened. Like, there's nothing else that you can do. We're at the end, essentially, because essentially I feel like she was gonna die. But it's unclear as to what's happening. But if you read it and you come to the same conclusion I do, someone's sick, they're on their deathbed, they've been poisoned, they're trying to figure out what happened, what led up to this illness, and the person talking to them also was sick and went through this, like, this spiritual ritual, and you'll read about that, and they're trying to walk her through what happened, first of all with them, and then what happened to this entire area and the reason why, because they get to a point where he was like, this is it, this is the instance. This is it. You need to pay attention to this. But even if you pay attention to this, there's nothing you could have done to help. I really liked it. It's called Fever Dream. The Spanish title, I did my paper on this too, is that The Rescue Distance. It's called Rescue Distance in Spanish. But, like, I didn't really fuck with that title, so yeah. Anyway, that's my favorite story. Fever Dream, read about it. Next, Science Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. Interesting story. Probably my second favorite one. It's my favorite one in terms of characterization. I think Fever Dream is my favorite one in terms of how it's written overall, but my favorite one for characterization is Yuri Herrera's Science Reading End of the World. Essentially, it's a girl who has to cross the border. We're theoretically thinking it's Mexico to the US because it's never named where she's crossing the border to. It's just she's supposed to deliver something across the border and then come back. And each person she encounters is a person on this like journey that's supposed to help her through this whole thing. So she meets somebody like supposed to get her across the border, then she meets another person that helps her, blah blah blah. And it's like she's also looking for her brother in this like story as well because he left, right, and hasn't come back, and she's trying to figure out like where the fuck he went. So anyway, there's that. But the way that the story is told and when you learn about it, it's really cool because it's supposed to be like, it's kind of like a Dante's Inferno, but it's based on the Mexica, like underworld. So there's 9 realms that she has to traverse, and then she gets to the underworld, and then she essentially dies. And the death is it's talking about the kind of emotional, spiritual, and even physical death of migration. And how you'll go somewhere and it becomes like a sort of death of your own culture and language and experience because you're now in the face of this other one that's supplanting what you have. And it's like this weird liminal space that you feel when you can't connect to your old one as easily, right? But then you're really not in the new one as well. Like it's a weird, so it's really interesting as a story. Really enjoyed it, recommend it. The last story I Souls at Night, Kent Haruf. It was a cute little ditty pop. It's about a widow, and they decide to have like a relationship, and they kind of go through their lives in this relationship until like kids come back and their past come back to like haunt them, how they write it, but their past comes back and they have to make these really hard decisions about reconciling what they've done in the past and why their relationships failed in the past, and all the things that they were and were not in the past for their kids and themselves and their partners and all this kind of shit. And so it's one of those kind of books. Like I said, it was cute little ditty pop. It's one of them, because it's a movie with Jane Fonda and somebody else. I don't know what the dude name is, but it's a movie and it looks pretty cool. I mean, it's just one of those, I feel like, not Hallmark type movies, but Hallmark adjacent movies. And that's not bad because I watch Hallmark movies. It's a little bit dramatized, it's got the drama, it's got the romance, it's got the past that comes back to haunt you type shit, things like that. It don't have the happiest ending, but yeah, it's one of those type of movies. So anyway, that's the books that I read for this semester for this class. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you later. Bye.